What's up, and welcome back, Otakuans, to another episode of the Otaku Octagon. This week, we're continuing our manga corner series with the 7th volume of The Rising of the Shield Hero. Our next volume will cover episodes 4 to 6 of the anime, and thankfully, Season 2 left us with plenty of cut content to share. The biggest difference between the first season to the second season will be the episode count, with Season 1 ending with 25 and Season 2 ending with just 13, and that 13th episode being just a filler / wrap-up episode. With the clear difference, a lot of content was left out of the adaptation for the season, and for some reason, the changes mostly focus around Rishia. Most of her development from Season 2 is left out, while all of her annoying parts are left in. The anime does a weird job of just making her seem overly emotional and rushes the scenes where she comes in clutch, and she comes in clutch quite frequent. The anime actually spends more time adding development to the other generals in the army than Naofumi's newest party members. The world will never know why certain choices were made, but let's not speculate, and let's instead jump into the 7th volume of The Rising of the Shield Hero. Prologue: The Search. Unlike in the anime, up until this point, Os had not joined the party. The current events, the other heroes are still missing, and following the decapitating of the Spirit Tortoise's head, our hero party has been tasked with locating them. As usual, our prologue gives us a backstory of everything that has happened so far, reintroducing our reoccurring characters, but this time, we especially focus on the last interaction between the SHIELD party and Liark. Fast forward to current events, the crew is alerted by the sounds of screams nearby, so they rush off. Chapter 1: Helping Others. Our chapter opens with the SHIELD heroes parties reacting to the sound of screams. Since Philo and Raftaya took the tortoise's head, the hordes of the Spirit Tortoise's familiars had not stopped. This and the presence of that new clock next to the wave clock proved that the Spirit Tortoise threat was still real. Quickly dispatching the monsters, they soon were defending themselves against the disguised bandits who feigned fear. Situations like this have become more and more common along the Tortoise's way. Many towns and cities have fallen, and the people have had to resort to much more to survive. The same goes for the armies the Coalition had thrown at the creature. That evening, the three return to the castle where they find the others, Rishia and Eclair, off training. Here, we quickly reintroduce Rishia, but we also find out more about her current training. Though not consistent, Rishia has made improvements and from time to time manages to take the upper hand during sparring. While the old lady did say Rishia held the most potential for growth in the Hengemuso style, her current stats were abysmally low. Next, we reintroduce one of our combat advisors, and at the time, a member of the SHIELD Heroes party, Eclair. She has been the one leading Rishia's and Raftaya's training, and she is the one of the most decorated knights in the Milwamark's army. As for Kyo, he will soon be back on his feet from being attacked, and those familiar eggs being implanted in his back. It's been about a week since the Spirit Tortoise's defeat, and the only thing Naofumi could find is looters and refugees. But soon, things will change, and not for the better. Chapter 2: Spirit Tortoise Familiar. Human Type. I'm sure many of you can guess what the focus of the following chapter would be, but first we are introduced to a completely new familiar type. Spirit Tortoise Familiar Amalgamated Parasite type, and it's the same one we saw in episode 3 of the anime. This new type was pretty much a chimera with the body of a dragon, the head of a lion, and scythe-like arms like a praying mantis, and the signature tortoise shell. It seemed to be dragging something, but Philo didn't hesitate a moment to dispose of the creature. But something was off about the body. It seemed to just be pieced together, and when one of the limbs were cleaved off, the party sees that inside were hordes of other monsters clustered together. Just then, Naofumi hears the same voice behind him that originally warned him of the coming danger. It explains that the monster before them is a legion that infects other monsters and amalgamates them together to form a larger threat. To defeat it, they would need to target the load that it seemed to be dragging with their strongest attacks. Realizing whoever or whatever it was behind him somehow managed to bypass his shooting star shield, he spins around to see his latest visitor. Before him stood a very beautiful woman, and considering the beautiful women that surround him every day, but now was not the time for words, but for action. Naofumi orders his two comrades to use the strongest attacks to dispose of the creature, and Raphtalia uses her yin-yang sword she learned from Eclair, and Philo, her newest spell she recently learned from Melty, Drifa Tornado. Drifa, like Zawite, is a class of spells that Naofumi assumed Raphtalia would learn first. Even this wasn't strong enough to put the monster down, so Naofumi begrudgingly switches to his Shield of Wrath to assess his dark burning skill. Once alight, he waits until the creature has fallen before switching back. Now, we turn our attention to our newest visitor. She explains that they have done well to save everyone from this danger, but he still hasn't destroyed her. Still confused, Philo, after smelling her, exposes that she's neither human nor demi-human, but instead a spirit tortoise familiar, human type. Chapter 3. The Spirit Tortoise Awakens. Still taken aback, Naofumi tries to wrap his head around the situation and asks the woman to return with them to the Adventure Guild to talk. Once there, Naofumi hears of the backstory of Os and the cover that she had created for herself while doing her job. While yes, she was partially responsible to the souls sacrificed to the beast, she also explained that this was the line of defense between the waves and the survival of humanity. Through her explanation, he understood what Vittoria meant between protecting the world or the people. We also learn here that Os knows that the Spirit Tortoise has been taken over, and all the lives being currently lost will be for naught, since the intention of this invader isn't to erect a barrier with those souls, as originally intended. Soon, a knock was heard at the door, and the Guildmaster pops in to alert the Shield party of the message that the Tortoise had awakened. After confirming her intention to help the party fight the Tortoise, the new member of the party properly introduces herself. When he attempts to portal back to the side of the Spirit Tortoise, Os explains that the beast is likely emitting off a strong aura that would prevent him from doing so. So instead, they chose to return to the castle. On return, the Queen is reintroduced to the mistress of the Spirit Tortoise Nation, Os, the Spirit Tortoise Familiar. From what she knew of her, she was a wicked woman who was known to manipulate kings and nations. But now, Os was as humble and sincere as can be, so the Queen is also put at ease. The army, including our hero, takes off to the tortoise once more. Chapter 4. Spirit Tortoise Tyrant. With Os in tow, the Shield party and the army of Melmark heads off to meet with the Spirit Tortoise again. While en route, Naofumi inquires about the whereabouts of the other 7-star heroes, but is told since they are also out investigating the lands, it will take time for them to reach the tortoise. Unlike the Shield, their weapons did not offer a portal shield for them to teleport. And though they are vassal wielders and have quite more skill than normal citizens, the Queen admits that they are not as powerful as Naofumi. But they may be a match for the skills of Raphtalia and Philo. The conversation is interrupted by powerful tremors and the sound of explosions that completely take the party by surprise. Doubtful this is the work of the Spirit Tortoise, referencing their first fight, Naofumi is proven wrong by the sight of the tortoise. From his perspective, the tortoise seemed to have rabies. A long web of drool dangled from his gaping mouth and his eyes seemed to glow red, while the beast stumped the ground. This new appearance is also shown in episode 3. Across his shell, towering spikes protruded, and the tortoise now seemed crazy, even walking much faster than before. Because of his change of appearance, Naofumi nicknames its new form Spirit Tortoise Tyrant. Just as we saw, these new spikes were its new way of taking souls in a long-range area attack that destroyed everything. Naofumi had seen something of this once before in a video game, and it was indeed a world-ending attack. Understanding their new mission, the Shield party spots the coalition armies splitting their defenses to distract the tortoise and heads to join them. Chapter 5. Mass Destruction. Our next chapter starts out with the Shield having an impromptu meeting inside of a carriage dashing along the side of the battle. Here's where the other generals are finally introduced to Os and learn of who she really is. Their reaction? Not wildly different from what we saw in the anime, which is understandable. Many wondered if they can in fact solve the issue by simply taking Os' life, and they were actually probably right. She also held responsibility for what was occurring. Now allowing them to place all blame on Os, Naofumi this time lectures the generals on true sacrifice and their ways of having heroes deal with their problems. Choosing to move forward in the conversation, Naofumi volunteers his party to once again risk life and limb to decapitate the beast. Knowing it wouldn't finish it off, this would at least buy everyone more time, just like the first instance. Seemingly useless to the battle and little knowledge about the tortoise and his weaknesses, Naofumi sends Os to instead work with Rishia to research a way to defeat the tortoise for good, along with the queen, since she was something of a historian herself. Back to planning for their counterattack, Naofumi learns this new form does come with a drawback to the tortoise. With no apparent rhyme or reason, the beast from time to time will completely stop and won't move for 30 minutes to 2 hours, but when approached, will resume its charge. Once talks were done for the time, Naofumi returns to his carriage to find Rishi and Os in deep conversation over textbooks. He informs them that they would resume once the tortoise finally moves again, and as if preemptively answering Naofumi's unasked question, Os informs him that it is stopping so that it can gather more energy from the earth in order to use that powerful spike attack again. Naofumi wonders should they then attack now before it gathers the energy. But Os informs him it would be best to wait further down his path since it's heading to a weak energy-filled area, and that would be the best place to attack. So, the party members mentally prepare to start their next battle. Chapter 6 Versus the Spirit Tortoise. Opening Stages. An hour later, the tortoise resumes its move. Naofumi used the past hour trying his best to read through the many documents and research concerning the legends and known history of the spirit tortoise, but to no avail. So much information had been lost to history, and since the best knowledge on this existed in the now decimated nation of the spirit tortoise, they were pulling at scraps. From her research, she found that the best way to deal with the tortoise is to first get inside of its body. Inside, they say there's information left behind by the past heroes inscribed in stone. There were some sketches of some inscribed writings that Rishi was able to discover and now present to the shield. Goal is waves, world, prevent. So, the tortoise is trying to prevent something. But what? More questions than answers. But this does mean Naofumi's next mission is to get back on the tortoise's back. With this new knowledge, Naofumi orders Philo to meet the tortoise, and our party joins Naofumi under his force field. During the last battle, the tortoise shot electro waves from his mouth to deal with the shield's advance. But this time, when it turns to scream at the crew, instead the spikes on the shell shoot out. Philo's quick reaction and speed allows her to easily dodge those spikes landing around them, but the carriage violently shakes back and forth before Os uses a spell to seemingly control the gravity within the carriage. Os explains this gravity magic is a magic lost to humans long ago, but some monsters are able to master it, and he wondered whether Philo could one day learn it. Os promises to Naofumi that she'll teach him the spell whenever they have a moment of time. During this time, we also learned about magic casting using jewels as a medium, as Therese had done before, as they continue speeding toward the tortoise. Soon they reach the base of the beast, and Naofumi again orders Philo and Raphtali to take down the tortoise as they had done before. He then deploys all of his defensive shields, then him, Rishia, and Os cast support magic to boost Philo and Raphtali's stats. Possibly sensing the impeding attack, the spirit tortoise resorts back to his electrical beam to defend itself, but Naofumi takes the brunt of the attack, and the old lady sort of helps to defend against the beam. Something to note, realizing she doesn't have any ability that will be useful in this fight, Eclair is openly disappointed with herself. Os instead steps forward and grabs a hold of the shield and uses a spell that enlarges the area of defense of Naofumi's shield and made it seemingly stronger. Noticing that her spell also drained her energy, Naofumi in turn casts a white heal to assist Os maintaining her own energy as the two defend against the still ongoing beam. When it finally stops, Naofumi gives the signal, and Raphtali and Philo unleash their strongest attack towards the neck of the spirit beast. Directional Sword of Heaven. Spiral Strike. This time, it seemed that the flesh of the tortoise was even stronger than last time. So soon, both Eclair and the old lady joined in for the final attack, along with the two, until they could finally cleave off the head. But that only lasted for a moment. Soon, strings of flesh came wriggling out from where the stump of the neck was, and with a thunk, A new head appeared where the old one once was, and at that moment immediately unleashes another electric beam at the party. Even with just barely resetting all his defenses, and again O's support, Naofumi barely defends his attack, and just as he was near death, he used his blood sacrifice against the priest. Naofumi barely defends his attack, and just as he was near death when he used his blood sacrifice against the priest, Naofumi could barely keep his consciousness, and is unable to focus enough to even heal himself. Luckily, he is soon feeling the effect of another spell, so he gains his own focus and switches to healing, and recouping his party's losses with potions, then immediately retreat. At current, they had no way to defeat the tortoise, let alone the fin. Chapter 7. Buying Time. While Buying Time is a fairly long chapter in the novel, the events that happen aren't that many, just an explanation into all that was happening. Following their near defeat at the hands of this even more powerful tortoise, the party retreats and meets back up with the Queen to discuss their next options. It was clear that the next possible avenue would be to enter the spirit tortoise's body to take it down. While the Queen may have an idea that could momentarily stop the beast, nothing was for certain and it would require many losses, but since they were now nearing the castle, there was no other choice. Saved by the cowlick, Vittoria reaches out to the shield and announces that she is now on her way because the situation was way past the point where she could just ignore it. All she would need is an hour to reach them, so the planning began. Stall the tortoise for 1 hour until the Filial Queen could arrive. Beginning to game the game, Naofumi thinks back on the beast's patterns of attacks and its current cooldowns. Since its change, it seemed that its cooldowns have lowered and also has an immediate refresh when lethally attacked. With the plan to stall set, the shield party goes back to buy time and they are soon met with the new familiar type. Spirit Tortoise Familiar, Spike type. Though not a threat, we learn that since they use the same type of energy Os does, she could use them as conduits as if they were jewels, and cast support magic on the rest of them without wasting her own energy. Once again, the tortoise chooses to defend itself with the electric attack, but this time Naofumi uses his Shield of Wrath to defend it, but this time with odd results. With the Shield of Wrath, Naofumi is easily able to defend against the beast's attacks, but a countdown soon appears in his vision, and following the attack, he finds he cannot move and his SP is at 0. Somehow, the beast was siphoning all of his SP, so he switches to his Soul Eater shield to regenerate. The fight resumes, but again, quickly, the tortoise uses another electric beam. The countdown didn't make any sense, it was way too soon. Somehow, when he defended using his Wrath shield, the tortoise attack had an SP draining effect, but he took no damage. Using the Soul Eater, no draining, but he took heavy damage and the tortoise SP wouldn't be restored. Torn, Naofumi once again chooses to take the brunt of the attack, almost again to the point of him losing consciousness. Now understanding the timing, the shield party resumes their assault, while the shielded hero knowingly switches between the shields at the prime time to reap the benefits of both, offense and defense. Just then, a new familiar appears as his new defensive layer. Spirit Tortoise Familiar, Electric Spike type, and Philo soon learns that her physical attacks do not work on his new enemy. Wary, Naofumi sends her back to the Queen to see the status of their new spell, and the battle continues to go on. Not much to note here other than how long the battle drives on, and that they teeter on the edge of defeat the whole battle, but thanks to O's support magic, manages to keep up the fight. When the Os displays her use of gravity magic on the enemy, Philo then shows up and finishes them all off with a Drifa Tornado, and then informs them all that the Queen and the troops are en route, but need more time. She also provides more potions for health and SP for the party and Ruklo fruit for Naofumi. Again, another electric beam is shot at them, but this time, when Naofumi uses his Wrath Shield, Oath casts Drain Seal to prevent the tortoise from also stealing his SP. Why it took so long to do this, the novel doesn't explain, but it may have something to do with Oath now not having to focus on restoring everyone's SP and now allowing her freedom for other spells to protect the SP. The countdown that appeared whenever Naofumi uses his Wrath Shield was now at 30 seconds, and when he used it, it was much harder for him and Philo to control the anger. But Oath uses the spell Black Dragon Flame to somehow reverse the countdown of the shield and relieve the anger, but at the cost of cursed burns to her own hand. Within eye distance of the castle and 30 minutes from Futoria's arrival, they had no choice but to continue their feeble attempts to slow the tortoise's progress. Repeatedly, Naofumi thinks to himself that he can't take another of these special attacks, but continuously they push on until finally Futoria joins the battle and our heroes can finally retreat. Chapter 8: The Search. Our next chapter is short and sweet. Futoria has arrived, so it was finally time to move on to the next step of the plan. Enter the beast and find a way to put the beast down for good. Switching now to Futoria, though she was powerful enough to easily crush the tortoise's head in her claws, the beast's regeneration was too quick, and soon he touted multiple heads, each shooting its own weaker version of the electric beam. Futoria, knowing she couldn't land the final blow, informs the crew to quickly find a way inside to defeat the creature. Chapter 9: The Spirit Tortoise Cave. The trip to the top of the Spirit Tortoise was unfamiliar. Since his reawakening, it seems that the landscape has made a noticeable change since the last time they had traveled up. Accompanying the Shield Hero party is of course Os, their queen, and selected soldiers for this private search atop the beast. Eventually, they find themselves in the same chamber they had reached before with a dead end, but this time, many passageways lay before the group. Inside, like a maze that should have turned this journey into days, maybe weeks long, was instead expedited through the efforts of both the Queen's and Rishi's research into this benevolent beast and has produced a map. Nearly perfect, they managed to find their way to a chamber with a new familiar, more closely resembling turtle men than the ape or yeti forms before, standing at 4 meters tall. Spirit Tortoise Familiar, Guardian. They easily dispatch the new foe, and the company soldiers are left flabbergasted by the shield party's display. Naofumi is starting to realize that maybe they aren't weak, but him and his party members are oddly strong. The decision was to use this chamber as a new base of operations. The soldiers and half the shadows will stay here and protect the rear, while the shield party joined by the queen and her personal bodyguard will continue forward to look for the heart. Chapter 10: Strangers. So much was left out or changed from the novel to the anime, but this chapter, for obvious reasons, was left adapted. As we saw in the anime, as our party is searching further into the cave, they eventually run into another adventure party. While it did make sense that other adventurers would be in the area, how did they manage to get atop the tortoise unless they've been trapped there for over a week? A noticeable difference is since at this point Rautaya is a master at illusion magic, she picks up on the fact that the other party is using some sort of magic to disguise themselves. In an instant, she uses the skill Anti-Mirage and reveals Liark, Therese, and Glass to Naofumi's surprise. Instead of the two parties agreeing to part ways, in the novel, the two parties immediately go on the attack and defense, and at that moment the wall also comes down, exposing more familiars. The way it looked, they were the ones behind the Spirit Tortoise, and this was his chance to stop them. A fight broke out, but oddly enough, it seemed like Liark was trying to say something, but could never get a word in over the attacks of the familiars. This engagement comes to an end when the ceiling oddly collapses between the two parties. When the smoke clears, Liark and his party eyes glow bright red, and were holding new turtle shell-inspired versions of their weapons. Spirit Tortoise Familiar, Mimic Type. A new familiar type appeared before them, and a new battle began. The fight between the Shield Party and Liark's Mimic Party may not have been in the anime, but it isn't different from any of our past fights. The Mimics were an exact copy of Liark and his party, so Naofumi knew all of their typical moves. With the help of O's gravity magic, they managed to overpower the monsters, but when they seemed defeated, they gave up the Mimic act and behaved more erratically. By switching to his Well Magic Core Shield with his Heat Beam counterattack, Naofumi is able to defend against the monsters while the Queen and O's both use strong ice spells to finally keep the monsters down. Chapter 11: The Hero's Inscription. Following the battle, the party found that the tunnel they were following had collapsed, so they had to try a different route. Eventually, they found their way back to the exit and continued their search back outside. The crew spends a good amount of time searching through the ruins of the fallen pillars and temples in the hope to find a resolution. Rishia finds the physical version of the copy inscription that was discovered before. Goal is Waves World Prevent. With the physical article in hand, Naofumi is now able to make out two more words: head, heart. From this, they agree that their best bet is to destroy the heart and head at the same time. With the new info, the party returns to the base of operations, also in fear that Glass and the others have found them, and if they're responsible for the spirit tortoise, who's to say they wouldn't slaughter the soldiers here too? But all the soldiers were there safe. After updating the soldiers on all the current events, they head off once more. It seemed like forever since their search began, but every route the map indicated ended with a dead end. Growing desperate, not knowing how long Victoria can hold out, Naofumi is alerted by Philo of the presence of a mimic covering a new tunnel. Using the same acid concoction he used against the bioplants, the crew unveiled the mimic and jumped down the hole. Before we get to the next part, something I noticed is the fleshlight cover for the hole the group jumps down in episode 5, and the hearts that Liark and the crew are fighting are actually mimics that we read about in the novel. Also, up to this point, everyone had been fighting and searching through the caves of the mountain atop the tortoise, but once they jump down the hole, the scenery changes from rocks to flesh, thus proving they have finally entered the tortoise's body. This transition seems to be skipped since we are suddenly surrounded by flesh when they found the blue hourglass. Following O's explanation of the nature of the hourglass, its tracking of the souls Following O's explanation of the hourglass and its tracking of the souls the beast had collected so far, the party soon finds the heart of the spirit tortoise. Again, the anime chose to take its own creative liberties with our next engagement. In the novel, when the group discovers the heart, no one else was there. While it does adapt a bit of the fight between the laser beam shooting heart and the shield party, the dialogue between the new enemy and the shield had not happened as yet. Along with a volley of laser beams, the heart was also capable of using gravity magic and summoning more familiars. Just as we saw in episode 5, Rautalia and Philo both land critical hits to the heart, but at the expense of O's also being critically injured. What wasn't shown is Naofumi's own internal dialogue. She had done all of this knowing she would die. Why was the world worth protecting? O's goal was to sacrifice herself for the good of everyone else, and Naofumi couldn't help but to respect it. But something was wrong. He was sure Victoria had gotten the message to finish the tortoise, and Philo and Rautalia hadn't failed to fatally injure the heart, but the oath was still standing and the heart had regenerated. Chapter 12. The Spirit Tortoise's Heart. With their plan once again ending in failure, Naofumi decides to resort to that sealing spell that the Queen had mentioned and returns to the troops. Again, explaining the situation, Naofumi learns that they had been attacked 9 times since they had last left and had suffered many casualties. The shield then decides it may be best to bring everyone back to the chamber while they use the sealing spell, so they all head back. The plan? Rautalia and Philo again commence their assault on the heart, supported by support magic from the Queen and Rishia, all the while the troops are preparing the sealing ceremonial magic. Now fighting normal people, we see that whenever the beam does manage to brush anyone, they are instantly disintegrated. Once the spell was ready, everyone switched to defense as the spell is shot and they wait the results. Failure. The heart then counterattacks, sending white blobs in all directions, again melting the targets on impact. More lives are lost, but due to Naofumi's quick reaction defense, they are not done. They prepare to cast a second sealing spell, while Philo and the old lady use a Hingen Muso style technique to shoot a magic ball at the heart while ripping through hordes of familiars like paper. Once it reached the heart's force field, Naofumi uses the opportunity to also order the mages to cast their sealing magic. And once it hit, it was over. But again, just for a moment. A moment later, the heart breaks free of the sealing spell and shoots a laser beam at the troops that Naofumi manages to get to and block in time. Feeling defeated, Naofumi asks Oz is there anything she could think of, and she lets him know that she felt the core directly below them while the heart was sealed. So, they come up with a plan to breach the floor and reach their target. This time, Philo and Rautalia will again fatally injure the heart, but at that time, the mages will seal it. Once the two unleash their final attack, the sealing spell is cast and Oz chants another spell, and this time they are able to open a stairway to the core of the beast. Knowing the danger that lies ahead, Naofumi has the Queen and the troops return to a safe chamber, while Rautalia, Philo, and Rishia join him. One key difference here between the novel and the anime, where Naofumi decides against bringing her, but she asks to come instead. In the novel, Naofumi decides to bring her along due to the stat boost her Kigurumi provides her and her improvements in Hingen Muso. She has steadily become a more useful addition to the party. Chapter 13. Who Pulled the Strings? The party descends the stairs to their final destination, and after a 10-minute descent, they finally reach a large room with a large strange object hovering in the center of the room, and behind that, the three missing heroes enclosed in the large transparent crystals. Rishia rushes forward to find a way to free them, but is rejected by a piece of paper. Then, as we see in episode 5 of the anime, a white-haired man is heard, then reveals himself to be the book vassal wielder. There's not much change to the dialogue outside of the already known differences between the anime and the novel, but the strange man does explain how he managed to capture the other heroes. The sword hero was captured after all his party was left dead, and he was left attacking like a wild boar. The spear hero was caught while escaping once he knew his party would fail, and the bow hero was tied up by his party and left for dead. On the chamber of the wall, what the tortoise was able to see outside was being projected. Vittoria was still courageously fighting against the now many-headed tortoise with no clear end in sight due to its regeneration. Since Vittoria had successfully stopped the tortoise's advance, it was no longer gathering energy as before, which now forced our new enemy to focus on capturing the shield as well. The battle began. Naofumi decides to use the same strategy he used against Liart and use the shield to trip up and slow the enemy's movement, and was almost successful, but the enemy used floating paper to repel attacks. He had the luxury of watching the party and their technique through the eyes of the tortoise, so he mostly knew what they were up to every time. While the fight in the novel was somewhat different, we do see some of the attacks the enemy uses, such as the flaming bird, but what we don't see is Naofumi's expert uses of his counterattack shields. Again, we see a new familiar type, Spirit Tortoise Familiar, Neo Guardian type, that appears from a wall sporting spears, bows, and swords. With Rishia and Eclair both taking one, the old lady taking two, Naofumi would have to hold the other 6 while Philo and Raftaya took their time gathering magic to use their powerful skills. But this guy had no intention in giving anyone a moment to breathe. With so many threats coming in different directions, Naofumi finally feels forced to use his Shield of Wrath, but is saved by a flying circle disc. Chapter 14. Liberation. Up until now, Liart and his company had not reached the lower chamber. Also, don't forget, in the novel, Naofumi does not believe Liart and his party and are still under the impression that when they reach the core, they will find all of them standing there with their arms crossed. So, when Glass, Liart, and Therese enter the chamber, Naofumi falls deeper into despair, wondering how they would survive between 2 sets of enemies. Naofumi even considers porting out of there, but sees the skill is unavailable. So instead, he readies his shield to defend against the now rushing Liart, but Liart instead passes him and attacks a familiar. Why were they attacking the familiars and not the shield party? Naofumi asks this, but is still left with more questions. Weren't they on the same side? Why? Shouldn't they be working together? Liart hadn't answered a thing, but Therese clears everything else up. Simply, they could not allow him to take control of a spirit beast even if he is from their world. Liart then clears up an earlier misconception. They weren't trying to attack the shield party, but work together with them, but Kyo had purposely caused the cave in, collapsed the floor of the Liart party, and summoned the familiars to attack them to make it seem like they were the enemy. Watching Liart fight the Neo Guardians, Naofumi recognizes that they seem a lot weaker than they had before, to which Liart admits that are only that powerful during the waves, but outside of that, Liart was level 75 and Glass 40, to the disagreement of Glass. Somewhat gaining Naofumi's trust, he invites them all to join his party as support troops, and they accept. Working together, Naofumi helps propel Liart forward to close the gap between them, and when the Neo Guardians appear to stop the advance, uses a shield prison to give him another stepping stone, and then comes down and destroys the barrier with a defense-ignoring attack. Furious, Kyo creates even more on top of another, but soon are smashed to pieces by the old woman's own defense-ignoring attacks. Finally, Philo finishes her prep and unleashes her attack at the now exposed Kyo, ripping a hole right through his stomach. Staggering for just a moment, Kyo's body regenerates the wound in seconds as if nothing happened. As we saw in the anime, Kyo takes this moment to activate the gravity magic, pinning everyone to the floor but Ose, Glass, the old woman, and Rishia. But Ose uses her own magic to negate the gravity in the area around herself. Using some soul healing water provided by Naofumi, Glass boosts herself and then covers the room in her powerful attacks, but even this boost starts to wear off. According to Kyo, Spirit have no endurance, but what was he referring to? Glass? Naofumi watches as the others fight relentlessly, and he couldn't help but feel as just a spectator. Osu then grabs his shield and tells him to concentrate. We learned previously that the Whale Magic Core Shield had a skill called Magic Assistance, and according to Osu, will allow her to assist him in the casting a powerful spell. We see a scene familiar to this in episode 6 of the anime, when Naofumi fails to use his Shield of Wrath against Kyo. From Naofumi's perspective though, weaving this powerful spell was like a puzzle. Each piece was arranged differently, and he felt that with his current knowledge, there were very few shapes he could configure with them. But he felt Osu assisting him putting it together, correcting the wrong placement and guiding him to where the pieces should fall. I had always wondered how Naofumi knew what words to say when casting that spell, but even Naofumi had no idea where the words were coming from, but it all seemed to come from him. All Liberation Aura, Field of Effect, all allies. Naofumi had never even heard of Liberation before. He was under the impression that Drifa was the highest class, but he was clearly wrong. Once activated, all his MP and SP drained away, and he felt faint, but Osu seemed off. Once again, unlike in the anime, this spell did not shoot at the tortoise core, but it seemed like the spell had sped everyone up 3 times, and they were 3 times as strong. The gravity field no longer affected their movement, so they were able to attack as they pleased. Now on the defense, Kyo kept erecting new barriers around himself, just to be broken in seconds by another attack, but each time, Osu winces. Finally starting to add things up, Kyo says the words that Naofumi is thinking. Osu was the spirit tortoise, its soul in human form, not a familiar. Kyo then uses Binding Rope of Light to capture Osu and pull out the remaining energy for his own. Chapter 15. The Spirit Tortoise's Soul. Our next chapter is main course. Chapter 15. The Spirit Tortoise's Soul. Our next chapter is the main course for Rishia we have all been waiting for. Since the beginning, we have all been hyped up to the special moment for Rishia, much like that we saw in the anime, but much more beautiful and meaningful. In episode 6 of the anime, we see Rishia finally have enough and digs deep into her bag of justice gifted to her by Atsuki. Up until now, I guess she had been internalizing all the danger and fuckery around her, until the point it all bubbles over and she taps into the Hanging Muso God form we've been waiting for. While Rishia's power-up was badass and all in the anime, it's highlighted even more by the fact that Kyo had just powered up to what seemed to be the final boss level. Naofumi words, not mine. His mastery over his vassal weapon had gotten even more powerful and no one else in the room could stand toe-to-toe with him. But when Rishia had had enough, there was nothing left to talk about, other than everything she had to say to him while she proceeded to be on his bumpers. One small thing I would mention different from the adaptation, we see Rishia shoot a light sword from her weapon to destroy the hero's cage, but in the novel, this sword of light is created by her in her own hands, then tossed as if it were a small blade. Kyo is afraid and is on the ropes. He is now throwing anything and everything at her, even scraps of paper, but to no avail. While distracted, Naofumi thinks on how to destroy the core, but when trying to switch to his wrath skill, is told by Osu from across the room that wouldn't be powerful enough. She says it's finally time, and a moment later a breeze blows by Naofumi, and in his field of vision, he reads, Spirit Tortoise Hard Shield, conditions met. The new shield looked nearly exact to the Whale Magic Core shield physically, but when it came to the stats, these have more than doubled. Here, the shield's energy blast option was blinking. It seemed Osu was pleading with Naofumi to finally kill her, but he hesitated. He thinks about the events that had led up to this point. How had they even reached this point if it had not been for Osu? Why was she so willing to sacrifice herself for the world that she was designed to destroy? His hesitation was just long enough for Kyo to finally notice him, and to send a column of paper his way, to which Naofumi easily fends off with his new shield. This of course pisses Kyo off, wondering how he could effortlessly repel his attack, but just like Naofumi caught off guard, lost in thought, he too was soon accosted by Rishia, reminding him who his opponent was, and how she couldn't allow him to continue when he is a direct affront to Itsuki's justice. To everyone's surprise, she then throws her weapon, destroying every layer of barrier between the two, finally coming to a stop in the chest of Kyo. It was time. Naofumi turned to Oath once more to be met with a gentle nod. He then readies his shield towards the core of the spirit tortoise, and the shield suddenly sprouts 4 legs to support his weight, and crosshairs appear in his vision. It then summons an enormous amount of energy from the room, and formed a large ball of crackling energy, the same electrical beam that the tortoise had shot at him many times before. The shield then morphed into a shape like a gun barrel, and wing-like pedestals appeared behind him. He aimed and fired the shot, and the room went white. While Kyo did try to stop the beam, and then Naofumi, the beam was too powerful for him to touch, and the same shield that once surrounded him before was now protecting Naofumi. The beam burst through barrier after barrier, seemingly getting stronger and wider until it met the core. On impact, it shrieked horribly until it finally shattered into pieces. Everything went white again. Once he had his bearing again, he found everyone was safe, and Rishia had ran straight to him with a magic ball in her outstretched hands. The fight was not over. Kyo was still standing and he was angry. He then showed that he still retained much of the spirit tortoise's energy, and with it, he condenses it until it formed a ball of gravity so powerful that it warped space and time and tore a hole in the air. He then escaped through that hole, out of reach of our victorious heroes. Action not permitted. Holy heroes are not allowed to invade another world. Just in the anime, the system prevented Naofumi from following Kyo into the hole. Rataya calls out to him, and he turns around to return to a dying Oath's side. Passing by Liart and crew as they approach the hole, he promises Naofumi they will chase after Kyo in his place and return afterwards. Epilogue: Oath's Horai. The final chapter of Volume 6 focuses on the final scene of Episode 6 as the credits roll, which fits perfectly with the novel's epilogue. As we see in the anime, Naofumi and Oath manage to have a short conversation before she passes. Naofumi blames Oath for everyone being sad for her, saying that if she wanted no one to regret her death, she should have done a better job acting the part of the villain. They then discuss the state of the other 3 heroes. Though still breathing, they were badly beaten and would need immediate response, and they would be of no use anytime soon. Oath tells Naofumi that he must go after the spirit tortoise energy. The lives lost during this event shouldn't go to waste. If he can retrieve it, he can use it to activate the barrier that was always meant to be and buy time until the next wave. Another important piece is Oath informing him that following her death, the seal on the next malevolent creature will break, the Phoenix. She even says that it is even more powerful than the tortoise was. I'm not exactly sure what she means by this next statement, but she says that she will do everything she can to best keep the news of her death from reaching the next beast. Besides that, the chapter ends as episode 6 does in anime. As Oath begins to fade away, she leaves one last gift to the shield. Special request approved. Naofumi now has what he needs to enact his revenge on Kyo. But in that moment, he couldn't do more than to hold Oath's hand as she fades away. Just as we saw, pushing her worries of Isuki's to the side, Risha requests to join the party on the journey as a member of the Shield Party. The Shield Hero Party steps into the portal. And down goes another one. Volume 7 of the Shield Hero has come to an end, and wow, Season 2 really robbed us. Like high noon, middle of rush hour traffic, robbed us of what we should have been the most amazing season. As I continue to do research and compare the anime to the novel, I realized the true downfall of the second season is simply not enough episodes. For example, the first 6 episodes of this season covered about 2 volumes of the light novel, and the last 6 should do the same. In Season 1, we received 25 episodes to adapt 5 volumes, and now 13 to adapt 4. Highway robbery. But neither here or there, the ball is rolling on our Rising of the Shield Hero volume review, covering all the volumes of Season 2 of the anime. If you're not new here, you know that this episode came out relatively fast, so let's keep our fingers crossed the energy will persist for the next 2 volumes. Maybe I'll take a shot of some spirit water and get back at it. Well, until next time, peace.